All right, guys, we are on day 5 notes and of Unit 11, and we're going to talk about the unit circle again. We introduced it, but it does take some practice. All right, so we're going to fill in our diagram for the second time, and so hopefully we'll do it a little bit faster than on day 4. All right, so we know we'll start with our quadrants: quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. Okay, remember in quadrant 1, both our x and our y are positive, and remember that x represents cosine theta and y is sine theta when we're talking about coordinates on the unit circle. Okay, and so therefore cosine theta would be positive, sine theta would be positive, and remember that tangent theta is equal to sine theta divided by cosine theta. And so in this case, that would be a positive divided by a positive, which makes tangent theta positive. And so we say all trig functions are positive in quadrant 1. Okay, in quadrant 2, all right, your x is negative and your y is positive. So cosine theta would be negative, sine theta would be positive, and tangent theta is sine theta over cosine theta, which is negative. And so sine theta ends up being the only one positive in quadrant 2. Okay. In quadrant 3, our x and our y are both negative, so cosine theta is negative, sine theta is negative, but tangent would be a negative divided by a negative, which is a positive. And therefore, we call this quadrant T plus to help us remember that tangent theta is the only one that's positive. All right, in quadrant 4, x is positive, so cosine theta was positive. Sine theta would be the y, which is negative. And again, tangent theta would be a negative divided by a positive. And so that ends up being negative. And so cosine theta is the only trig function positive in the 4th quadrant. Okay, let's go ahead and label our landmark angles. So we have 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 180 degrees. We have 270 down here. Okay, and then making it back is 360 degrees. Okay, if we go the negative direction, this could be negative 90 down here, negative 180, negative 270, and then negative 360. Okay, we're at the same time, we're going to talk about radians since we know that too. Okay, 0 degrees would be 0 radians. Okay. I like to go and label 180 because that's the way we convert our radians by making our proportion that 180 degrees is the same thing as pi radians. So we can put that there. We can also do negative 180, which is be negative pi radians. Okay. Half of 180 would be 90, so half of pi would be known as pi over 2. Okay. And therefore down here would be negative pi over 2 for the negative 90 degrees. Okay. 360 is twice 180, so twice pi would be known as 2 pi, and negative 360 would be known as negative 2 pi. Okay. And then we just have the 270s, and hopefully you guys remember that that is 1.5 times around, and 1.5 is the same thing as 3 halves, or 3 pi over 2. Okay. And this would be negative, and this one would be positive 3 pi over 2. And all of our landmark angles, okay, are written in degrees and in radians. So now we'll go to the unit circle here in the middle. Remember that it's a unit circle because the radius from the origin, 1 unit out, and so the coordinates of this point here, it would be 1, 0. Okay. Going over in the other direction would be negative 1, 0. Going up 1 unit would put us at 0, 1. Okay. And then going 1 unit down would put us at 0, negative 1. Okay. Into the triangle over here inside of our unit circle, going over is x amount. Okay, this is also known as cosine theta. And when we go up, we go up y amount, okay, which is known as sine theta. Okay. On our hypotenuse, since the hypotenuse is the length of the radius, that's 1. Okay. And then we have our theta as our angle inside the little right triangle, so that this is the opposite side, our adjacent side, and our hypotenuse side. Okay. The coordinates up here would be cosine theta, comma, sine theta. Okay, and that is how we fill in our diagram so that we can start using it. Okay, so we're going to head down. And in number 1, it says if sine theta, and hopefully you guys know that this is a less than sign, so that's less than 0, and cosine is greater than 0, in which quadrant does the terminal side of angle theta lie? So what they're asking, okay, we're going to set up our little A plus all students take calculus. So they're asking about the signs there. And so we're always going to write down all students take calculus. All right. What we have to realize is that they're asking about theta being less than 0. All numbers less than 0 are negative. And so basically they're asking, where is sine theta negative? Okay. And so we know that all trig functions are positive in quadrant 1, so it's not there. Okay. In quadrant 2, sine theta is positive, and so it can't happen there. All right. But sine theta will be negative here because tangent theta is the only one positive, and sine theta will be negative here as well because cosine theta is positive and the only one. Okay. So we narrowed it down to 2 out of 4. All right. So now we're going to look at this one. What this one says is that cosine theta is greater than 0. All numbers greater than 0 are positive. And so they're basically asking you, where is cosine theta positive? And so we know cosine theta is positive in the first quadrant because all of them are positive. Okay. And we know cosine theta is positive in the fourth quadrant, okay, because that's what C plus stands for. And so if you notice, guys, this one is the one that's doubled circled, okay? They're asking where's sine theta less than 0 and cosine theta is greater than 0. So in this quadrant, cosine theta, we know, is positive. Therefore, it's the only one, which means sine theta is negative and tangent theta is negative, okay? And they were asking about sine theta being less than 0, which means negative, and cosine theta being greater than 0, okay, which is positive. And so this is the only quadrant 4, where those two things happen. Okay, and so they're asking which quadrant does the terminal side of the angle theta lie? It's got to be quadrant 4. Okay, so let's try it again. All right, so this time they're saying tangent theta is, or tangent of A, which is just a different way of naming the angle, is less than 0, and sine theta is less than 0. In which quadrant does the terminal side of angle A lie? So we're going to go ahead and say all students take calculus. Okay, and so now we're going to go ahead and look at the first one. They're saying that tangent of our angle is less than 0, which means tangent is negative. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and say not quadrant 1, that's where they're all positive. Okay, and not quadrant 3 because tangent is positive, and we want tangent to be negative, which means it's going to happen here and here. Okay, in quadrant 2, the only one that's positive is sine, and so tangent has to be negative. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, now that we use the first one to narrow it down to 2, we're going to use the second one to narrow it down to only one of them. So the sine of our angle A is less than 0. Less than 0 means negative. So we're looking where sine is negative. Okay, we know that it's not in quadrant 1. They're all positive. Okay, and we know it's not in quadrant 2 because sine is positive. Okay, it's going to happen down here in 3. Sine will be negative, and 4. Sine will be negative, okay? And so the one that it happened again in both is quadrant 4, okay? In fact, you guys can see from where we listed them out in the last one, since it ended up being the same answer, okay? Notice our tangent was negative and that our sine was negative. And you guys can see that that's the only quadrant that it happens in 4, okay? Let's take a look at one more. We're going to go ahead and do our quadrants since they're asking about them. All students take calculus. All right, so they're saying if sine x, so again, x is just another way of naming the angle, equals negative square root of 2 over 2, and cosine x equals negative square root of 3 over 2, in what quadrant could angle x terminate? Okay. So what we're going to realize is that they're not using the less than or greater than 0. They're actually giving us a value here, but that value is negative. And so where is sign negative? Okay. So sign is positive here, and they're all positive here. So sign is negative here and negative here. Okay. Now we'll use the second one to narrow it down. They're saying cosine is negative. So cosine is positive here and positive here. So it's happening here and here. And since this is the one that's double ringed, okay, it happens in quadrant 3. All right, hopefully that makes sense. We'll do some more practice on the back.